Hi, this is Amber.
And this is Lisa.
And you're listening to Unexplained Arkansas, a new podcast that explores urban legends, mysteries, and the unsolved in the natural state.
We're just two best friends discussing the unexplained in Arkansas.
Hello, and welcome to Unexplained Arkansas. This is Amber.
And this is Lisa.
Today we will be...
Amber has no personality today.
I don't have any personality. I am so sorry. I'm just going to say that right now. I don't have any personality today, so y'all are going to have to excuse me.
Yeah, it's been a personality left.
It's been a very interesting week. Left off, I have one that wants to continue working on the Jonathan Harden case, and I'm really excited to see what he comes up with. But
yes.
I've just been hearing a lot of very exciting things,
and that's
from
the
listeners.
Buried Treasure in Enola episode.
Yes, so. It is. We will have another Jonathan Harden episode coming up in a couple of months, but for right now, that's all you get. So, yeah,
just go back and listen to that episode. I think it's 18.
I think you're right. It's 18.
Okay.
And today is 20.
I'm losing count.
Well, that means,
and that's exciting.
That means we made it, right? That means
we
did.
Made
it past the hard points. We are at 20 episodes. You know, some television series end after 20 episodes. Some seasons do.
So we're just getting started.
That's right.
Just getting started.
That's right. So today we will be finishing up our episodes pertaining to the Ruby Stapleton case out of Searcy, Arkansas. This case, let me tell you guys, has been an eye-opener. For me, for Lis, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot this week. We've learned a lot about podcasting, about documenting true crime, about research and the importance of finding good sources. We've also learned how important it is to keep being victim-centered and respectful in all that we do. Now, while we don't have every member of the Stapleton family on board and supportive of our podcast, we do have the tremendous support and a brand new friendship with Ruby's granddaughter, Heather, who we have talked to all week, and I just love her. She's precious. Mm-hmm. But she has tirelessly worked to keep this case in the public and the memory of her grandmother alive. So our reasons for part 2 include a thorough examination of the case and also the opportunity to help Heather in her efforts to find justice or closure or both. So, you know, just to end on that, I want people to know that we take our positions as podcasters very seriously. And our ultimate goal is to find truth and also to make people feel a little better than they did before.
Yes, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
We are very, when we... You know, and we've been talking about this all week. Like, we love true crime, not because a crime happened. Obviously, we're not thrilled about that. But, you know, it is interesting because it's hard to fathom that people do these things. It's really hard to fathom. And I also don't ever want the victims to be forgotten. So it seems like the victims get lost in what happened to them instead of maybe who they were and the life they led. And in Ruby's case, we talked about her in the last episode. So
she was awesome.
She was.
She was the
it girl.
Myself, I think that's why this has bothered me so much this week, because I truly found parts of myself in Ruby's story. I mean, I'm a mom, I'm a professor, I'm busy, I've got my hands in everything. I love laundromats, yeah. But I really do think that I have become so taken with this case and Miss Ruby, because I do know that life as a working mom with kids and, just the hustle and the bustle and trying to get everything done and get everybody to where they're happy with, what's going on. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to be a mom. It's hard to be a woman. So,
it is.
So that's my take on Ruby. But I did want to add really fast our sources for this show and the show that we did last week. And I'm going to go down the list. And these are all articles that are in the public domain, that are published, that are out there already. And this is where we took the information from last week. One of the big ones was Murder Mystery, Most Likely to Be Murdered, Part 1 and Part 2 by Janie Jones. And this was with AY Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And we also took articles from the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Northwest Arkansas Democrat Gazette, apnews.com, the Southwest Times Record, georgepalace.com, and then, of course, today we'll be looking at case files obtained through FOIA requests from the Arkansas State Police and information provided by Ruby's granddaughter, Heather. Last week, they were trying to curtail Halloween festivities. Everyone was so shaken up by this event. Unfortunately, on Saturday, October 19th, 1963, Ruby's unclothed and brutalized body was found in a dry creek bed near Bull Creek in Beebe. The Arkansas State Medical Examiner quickly ruled her death a homicide, and this bizarre kidnapping case quickly turned into a murder investigation. And then what happened next was a law enforcement investigation spanning 60 years, many law enforcement agencies, and an excruciating wait for her family. Her granddaughter did want a copy of the case file in 2013 and was denied that case file by the Arkansas State Police. She was at home watching a TV show called Cold Justice, and she decided that she wanted to send her grandmother's case to the show to see if they could see something new. But the show only featured cases at the time referred by law enforcement. So she contacted Arkansas State Police asking for their cooperation, and they denied her a copy of the report. After that, basically, it ended up that, several emails were exchanged, but it ended up going to court. And in April 2017, Justice Rhonda Wood wrote the unanimous opinion, no charges have been brought to appear to be imminent. The victim's family and the public are entitled to know how the officials in this case, i.e. law enforcement, performed their duties. After winning this lawsuit, Heather and her mother received the records, but a great deal was missing. Today, we will tell you what is in some of those records.
Yes. All of them, no.
No.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. It's a lot. So that would take hours and hours. So I'm going to kind of start with, this is the actual report of the whole situation from the Arkansas State Police. And so you did just recap some, and this will kind of get into maybe a little overlap, but this is kind of in depth, and this is all typed up and just straight from the police report. And I will say, we kind of talked a little bit about this, but the Searcy Police Department at that time, they were just super small. They maybe had 6 officers. And so when this happened, they did get help from the Arkansas State Police, and it was also getting help from the White County Sheriff's Office. They were, submitting things to the FBI. So we'll get into all of that. But it does say that Ruby's body was sent to the Daniel Funeral Home, and I'm guessing that's like the roller Daniel that would be today.
That's what I thought too, that it would be the roller Daniel that we know
that's
today.
There on. That's what I would think.
Maybe there just wasn't a roller yet.
Yeah, it was just Daniel. Interesting. So it does say abduction was at 12:05 a.m. because that's kind of when the investigators found. And this was October 9th of the 63. Investigators found the victim's vehicle parked on the blacktop parking apron. I love this language too. 1960s language, by the way.
Yes, we have gotten a crash course in 1960s slang and 1960s language, and it's interesting. And not just this. I looked through a month's worth of newspapers, and so I found a lot of interesting things in those. A lot of things that I cut and saved and took pictures of for later because it's so interesting.
It is interesting. So the apron of the laundroma and headed toward the front wall of the obstruction. This goes into a whole lot of detail. So I'll just say they found her car. And then they did find in one of the dryers some damp clothing. In fact, she was using multiple dryers. So that we had talked about this dryer situation. So Ruby had spent the evening at her son's house. We had already kind of gotten into this, and his washer was broken, and so she offered to do some clothes for him. And so that's when she went missing and blah blah. So, and we've kind of gone into, but it does say when the police arrived at the laundromat, they found her car, they found the wet clothing. And that's another thing. It was in the dryer, but it was damp. And so we said that the wash cycle was 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Yeah. That's what we determined from the research last week.
Yes. And so she had time, she had been there, had gotten her wash completely done and put the damp clothes into the dryer. So this window of time really closed even smaller, because the window that she was there in this report said from 10:10 to 10:55 was kind of the window. And so it might have just been, 10:30 to 10:55.
That's kind of that's what I think too, because if she went through that whole washing cycle of 20 minutes, then she put them in the dryer, and it had to be after 10:30 when this happened.
Yes, I would think so. And obviously before 10:55, and we'll kind of get into that.
That is a very, very short time for something like that to happen. I don't remember what show I was watching earlier this week, but they were talking about the amount of time it takes to do a crime. Oh, I remember. It was something on the Idaho stuff. And they were talking about how he was in there for 16 minutes. And that's a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, because the girl... Yeah, we could go on and on about that case, but
right.
That's those.
But time is definitely a factor, because you have to get in there, decide you're going to take this person, get her out unwillingly, more than likely, and get her to the next location.
Yes, and Dr. Benson had even described Ruby, and just as in her mannerisms and such, that she would have been a fighter. And we'll kind of, we'll just let the listeners decide what they want from this, but I know my thoughts on it. So very small window of time there. So it did say a search of the victim's automobile revealed a dishpan identified as her property. So they kind of knew it was her car. And it did have some whisk in it, which is like a laundry detergent.
I know what whisk is. I think.
Okay.
I think my grandmother used whisk. I think.
So we're going to kind of get further into this, but one of the statements from Ruby's family talked about this whisk, and I was like, whisk. And then it kind of went into some other stuff, because I had forgotten about whisk. Like, then they mentioned Tide, and I was like, oh, Tide. It was like a detergent. But anyway, it said a search of the victim's automobile and the entire area of the abduction failed to locate her purse or the keys to her automobile. And we had talked about that in the last episode. Like, we were like, where did those go? So they did not find it. It was not there. It did say location of body. So at 5:15, it goes further to say October 19th. So this is, 10 days later, it did say a witness found the victim's body. And it was on a soft dirt of dry creek bed at the bottom of a soft dirt bank, about 13 feet in high. That was the bank's height. And it was called the Blue Bayou, which this will be important down the road.
You mean the Bull Bayou?
Yeah, Bull. What did I say?
Blue Bayou, like Blue. The Rod Stant. Like the Linda Rod Stant song, Blue Bayou.
I don't even know that. So, but anyway,
I do, because I like her.
Bull, I was about to say it again, Bull Bayou. And this creek bank was covered with vegetation and fallen leaves. So it was October, so that definitely lines up. It did say a piece of driftwood of an underdetermined length was also just right there with her body. So it was kind of from the top of the bank and with her body there. And it kind of ran parallel to the creek bed. So this goes into a whole lot of detail about the placement of her body. But, it did say the spot that the body was found was near that old McRae BB Road that you had mentioned. And it did say, I'm glad there's not pictures in the file.
No.
Let's just put it that way.
No.
I don't think I could handle that. And so it goes further to talk about how she was laying and like her arms and how they were. But it did say something very interesting here. So it did say it said a shallow cut extending from the area of, her vagina area up to the front center of her torso to a point about 5 inches below her throat.
So
there was a cut.
So to me, that'd be cutting the clothes off, don't you think?
Yes, that was my thinking. So because it did say that she was found naked, and it does talk about, so, we talked about how a belt and a button were located, but there was also something else. There was her brassiere. So that, because what happened was, yes, I think that a knife was taken to just cut off her clothes, and it cut the brassiere right in the middle. And so the brassiere was actually located under her body. Those items will come up later too. So it was like a belt, the brassiere, and then there was a button. And that kind of makes sense to me too, because he was cutting, so it was like parts. So I think they were cutting off the clothing to take the clothing, and then they left those pieces. And of course the brassiere was underneath her. So it was like, you know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm thinking. Now, I do wish, obviously this is 1963, they didn't go into, they would have been able to tell now if that cut was made post-mortem.
Post-mortem, yeah.
That would be very interesting to me to know.
What was the reason for taking that extra step post-mortem?
Yes, because, they did say the body was so decomposed that although she was nude, there really wasn't any physical evidence to show that she was sexually assaulted. That, we don't know what the point of the removing of the clothes, if it was just to maybe remove evidence or maybe make it look like it had a sexual component, but it really didn't. So those are kind of up in the air just because of just the time, just the 1963 and the way that it was investigated. So it does say a few minutes. So it goes into some facts of the case here, just the facts portion, which I thought was really interesting. So it said a few minutes before 10, the victim arrived. That's when she arrived at and it calls it the Norge Laundroma. Maybe that was the family. But she was driving a white 1961 Comet station wagon.
I would totally drive that, just FYI.
I cannot even imagine what that looks like. So
I would definitely drive that.
Okay, I'm going to need a visual on that. I'm going to have to look that up. And it said the victim entered the structure and placed her soiled items, on the floor. And then she engaged with the attendant, who was a Mrs. C.R. Hedgie. That's what it looks like. And then they had a brief conversation, and then they walked next door. So this kind of hit me different too. I wish my name
was Mrs. Hedgie and I drove a white station wagon. Both of those things are true right now.
You want those? You want that? Okay. Well, yes. I mean, there's nothing in the rules of whatever that says you can't change your name to Hedgie and get that car. Unless you just can't find it. I don't know. But anyway, it says that they walked next door to Harrison's Grocery because the laundroma was attached. But this hit me a little bit interesting because this was 10 o'clock and this was a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
So, and Ruby was like 59.
Well, maybe she was a night owl.
She must have been because
all the good television shows ended at 8 in 1963.
Probably 8 or 9.
So it's not like people stayed home to watch Netflix.
No, that is very true. I'm just thinking, if I'm out past 9, especially on a Tuesday night, something's wrong.
Yeah,
or it's a ball game.
That's true.
Or it's a ball game. Okay,
unless it's a ball game, I'm usually in my house at that time because I have 3 kids. So
maybe we're just tired.
We're old,
I don't
Lisa.
know.
Old, just say it.
But she was 59. Anyway, it just hit me that also that the Harrison's grocery store was open. And people were, and the laundroma had
Harrison's
people.
Grocery Store. I thought it was Angel's Food.
No, at that time it was Harrison's Grocery. That's what it says. They walked next door. And she went ahead and purchased whisk because she was on the way there. In other statements, it did say she was very concerned about not having whisk. Like she even mentioned, I guess Tide will cut it. So she really had a thing for whisk.
Well, that's how I feel about Tide, because I always use that Persil stuff you started using.
Yes, I love Persil.
So Tide will cut it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Tide gets it when I can't find Persil, I guess. But it's just interesting because she was very about this whisk. And so that's why she went to Harrison's. And while in there, she did talk to people. So, and then she began washing her clothes. And so she was like really engaged with washing her clothes and talking to everyone and hanging out. So, and this was about like, I guess the lady, the attendant, she left at 10:10. So that's why they said from 10:10 to 10:55, that was the window of being alone. It did say
that is not much time at all.
No, it's really not, especially when you think about the fact that even if she had just started her wash at maybe 10:05, that put her putting the stuff into the dryer at 10:25, let's say 10:25 to 10:30. So it's just a really small window of time here. It does say at James Williams, he was the operator of the Searcy roller rink. He closed down at 10, and listen to this, Ambi. Are you listening?
Mm-hmm, I am.
Okay, you just looked at me. Okay. But you looked at me like...
Am I supposed to look away?
I don't know, maybe.
Am I supposed to look away, Damien?
Hey.
No, not Damien like in Mean Girls, not Damien like in The Omen. Don't look at me.
I didn't know where you were going with the Damiens. I was like, Damien
That's
Eccles?
my favorite Damien. No, not him. My favorite Damien is from Mean Girls.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do have a Damien Eccles story. Remind me to tell you. Okay. I have several stories to tell you. But anyway, this guy at the roller rink, this is important. This has a point.
I'm
okay.
listening.
So he closed the roller rink, which I'm guessing that roller rink is where it is, like evidently in 63. I think it was out where it is now, but that's interesting.
Really?
But he did say he closed it at 10 and he left the rink about 10:30, and he drove the 3 miles distance. Yeah, that would be about 3 miles down from where this would be. And he passed the laundroma between 10:30 and 10:40, and he observed an unidentified woman alone in the laundroma, apparently engaged in washing. So he saw her. So she was visible between 10:30 and 10:40. So then that...
Oh my gosh. That is even smaller.
I know. This is closing a tremendous gap here, okay? So yeah, so there's some more facts going. So remember that too. I mean, that to me says a whole lot. So, and I will say this is really interesting. And in the articles that were on the line, it said a young boy was kind of sent in to collect clothing.
Yeah, that's what it said online.
Yeah, that's not
My
true.
My sources said, no, what? It's not true?
It's not true. So listen to this. Stay tuned. What? Okay. I know. This police file has all the facts. So Jack Gardner, an employee of Porter Rogers Farms, he had washed his clothes earlier in the day. So earlier that day, he had left his clothing there. Okay. So he went into the laundroma at 10:55 to basically come back and get his stuff. And he observed.
So what happened to the nice little boy going to get the laundry for his mom? That never happened?
That's like the telephone game. I don't.
Oh, okay.
I think it didn't happen. I don't know how and why that was in the papers, but that was not accurate information.
Yes, and that was what was in the paper.
Because this Jack Gardner would have been interviewed and such. Because this is, he had left. He did notice, he stated he observed a white Comet station wagon parked in front of the building, noticed a basket of clothing, which appeared to have been completed wash on the floor and in front of the dryer. So it was in front of the dryer. He noticed that the door of the dryer was open and that it was kind of partially. So they came in. This is really interesting. They came in to nab her, whoever this was, while she was loading it, because it's kind of half.
Half in, half out.
Yes. So she had put the wet clothes in the basket to carry it to the dryers. So that's the imagery I'm getting. And she was basically loading up the dryer, so she wasn't even done, because there was some in the dryer and some not.
Wow. That's very specific.
I know. Very specific. It does say within minutes after some stuff. Okay, at 12, it does say the Searcy Police Department. That's when they received the phone call from Mary Claire Stapleton. And Mary Claire is Ruby's daughter that was living with her. And so she had called at that time to, and this is just part of the fact notes, she had called at that time to kind of tell the police, hey, my mom's at the laundromat and she hasn't come home, you know? So she just asked, and she didn't drive. The girls didn't drive. Mary Claire was living there and Clarita was living there. So they wanted the police to drive by and check on her mom. And so within minutes of that phone call, officers Dean Hunter and another, this is very hard to read, by the way. I will say shame on the Arkansas State Police. For the way the file was submitted to Ruby's granddaughter, because it is hardly legible. But anyway, that's a different story. But it did say that she was kind of concerned because she did mention in other notes that Ruby had like a heart, just some heart problem. I mean, she was 59. I guess they were worried that she had just like fainted or passed out. Like they were thinking that they were going to the police were going to find her there.
Yeah, that it was like a medical emergency.
Yes. So that's where their mind goes. And that's kind of a natural situation, I would think. And so anyway, the officers, went by, and that's when they called back to Mary Claire and told her that what they found, told her what they found and that, she wasn't there. And anyway, so yeah. So then they picked up Mary Claire and then they drove her to the laundroma so she could kind of see it herself. And so she was like, oh, and so then she was like, well, I need to go tell my brother Glenn. They drive out to Glenn's house, which is kind of like you're going towards BB, kind of down the highway a little bit. And so they had, like, Glenn and them had gone to sleep after Ruby had left his house around 9. They mentioned that they maybe watched a little more TV. He had showered and he had shaved. So he was in bed. Okay. So when they got to his door, they were clearly tired, like him and his wife, Glenn and his wife. And Glenn is Ruby's son. Okay.
Yeah, we didn't recap that part.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So the police department, then the Searcy Police Department then notified the sheriff. So like I said, they're getting kind of everyone involved in this. So they did get the White County Sheriff's Department involved about the incident, about the missing person. And his name was Jack Price. So that could come up later.
Yes.
Yes, and it will. And it did say that evening there was, we had kind of gone into this a little bit. There were some kind of unusual things going on. There had been some robberies, but that evening, right near the laundromat, there were 2 of the tire stores broken into. Okay.
Yes.
And yes. And did we talk about that?
Little, we did. We talked about it, and very little was taken from either one of those businesses.
Mm-hmm, yes. And it looks like they had the police actually observed, it was a City Tire and then another tire place. And they observed that the people had, like, there was broken glass, and it was literally, do you want to know how much money it was? Do you remember?
I think it was less than $2 at both places.
It was $3 from each place. Oh. So $6 total was all, and they did not take any type of equipment or anything. So they didn't take any merch.
See Mabel bite me in the face?
I did.
I know if you were going to say anything or not.
I didn't actually see that because I was looking at this, and then I saw her jump into, you were petting her, and then
she bit my face. What in the world is wrong with you, cat?
Doesn't Max do that too? Everybody just bites.
I was wondering if you were just going to keep going or say something about the cat attacking my face.
At the time I saw you, you guys were happy. Having a little petting party.
Oh my gosh.
Anywho, moving on. So, so then it goes, I've already gone into that. So moving forward, so we've talked about all that. The other tire shop was actually called the Brookshire Tire Shop. And of course, we don't know anything about about these places because, we weren't even a twinkle in our parents'
my
eyes.
mother was like 4, so
yeah, your mother was 4, mine was 12. I don't even know, 12 13 at the time of this. Okay, so it did say kind of later in the early morning of October 9th. So this was like 2 a.m. It did say this. Oh, this is more about the City Tire. And how they observed the plate glass. Okay. So they did also, another fact about all this is Charlotte Glenn Rose, she was 14, and she was the one that had rode out to Glenn's house earlier in the evening with Ruby. Okay. So this was Charlotte. And so she just mentions that she was at home, and about 7:30, that's when Miss Stapleton kind of pulled up. I guess she lived near her.
Okay, so back up just a second.
Okay.
So when I was doing my research,
Mm-hmm.
the newspaper, or there was one of the sources, and I have it somewhere, that she went out to the Sons alone, but she did have somebody with her.
She did. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that was
Mm-hmm.
wrong too. What we had found in
yes.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. A lot of the reason you have to look straight at the case files, because
Mm-hmm.
some of it, like you said, it's like a giant game of telephone.
Yes. And I don't know where, I know that I'm sure the newspapers are doing the best they can when they're doing their articles.
I was a reporter for that very newspaper, so I know, these things are quick turnaround, these deadlines, things like that. So I understand. I'm not shaming them for getting things wrong, because goodness knows I got a few things wrong. So.
And I will say, we had a conversation, with Heather the other day, and we were both taking notes. And I looked back at my notes and I'm like, oh my, I hope Amber's notes look better than mine.
And then you realized they didn't.
Well, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Or hopefully your memory and my memory will serve our handwriting correct.
Well, so. I write like a former reporter and a former waitress, if you can imagine what that would be.
Oh, that's awful. Well, I'm a lefty.
Shorthand.
I'm a lefty righty people, so there. I'm ambidextrous. I'm very ambidextrous. But let's just say both hands produce bad writing. Yes. You can ask anybody.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. So, but it does say, so Charlotte, Ruby picked up Charlotte in the station wagon that you want.
Yep.
She picked her up about 7:30, and that's when they were gonna head out to Glenn's house. And basically, I guess they were just gonna go visit. It just says that they were that they had arranged to go visit Glenn's house and his wife Pat. So they get into the station wagon and they head out. And basically they visit with the family. They're just kind of hanging out. I guess the children were one of the children or whatever was kind of sickly. And so there was a conversation about how there was a plan made that Ruby was going to actually help Pat get one of the kiddos to the doctor. So that was mentioned, and Charlotte did remember that. So she talks about that. And then Charlotte did also remember about how the washer, Pat had come in and was like, hey, the washer's not working. And then, Glenn had gone out and Ruby had followed, how that happens, to kind of check out everything. And then that's when the plan, because Ruby was like, well, hey, I can just go, get this done, for you, because I've got some laundry. So I'm just going to tell you that Ruby, I mean, all the things that she's doing is amazing to me.
Yes,
because,
me too.
And it does very much remind me of my mother.
I hate doing my son's laundry, and I live with them.
Well, he's one day you're going to be like, bring your,
no,
I'm going to do
no,
your, and your
I'll
grandchildren.
Stop you right there. No,
whatever.
No,
you will.
No.
You will too.
Once they start multiplying, no. People need to do their own laundry.
Well, I'll just tell you right now, Elle, I'm doing your laundry and I'm doing your grandkids' laundry.
And you can do mine too.
But my mom used to do all that stuff. I don't know. It just reminded me very much. Ruby was reminding me very much of my mom. And she kind of had a little, I don't know, my mom vibe in her looks and everything. It was kind of weird. She looked like she could be related. But anyway, okay. So now the next fact goes into Glenn. And I guess they called him Glenn Dewey. But he just said something. This was more conversation that Charlotte remembered about the washer and dryer. So this went into a lot of information about that. And it did also, she just remembers back that, as they were pulling away, so they finally loaded up the car with the clothes, and Charlotte's remembering that Ruby was very concerned. Like, she pulled over and was like, do we have the whisk? And like, she went to look for it. So again, I'm
right.
laughing because it's
the
really
whisk keeps coming up. Yeah.
I know, it came up. The whisk came up many, many times, which I think is very interesting. So anywho,
that's what my grandmother used. I remember.
Yeah. It must have just been like the Persil of its day.
Probably
I guess. So she did, Mrs. Ruby, I called her, she was just saying, I guess she called her Mrs. Stapleton. They left, and so Ruby took Charlotte home. So she didn't take, obviously Charlotte did not go. And I'm thinking, man, it's a shame that she didn't go, because maybe things would have, if someone had been home, because no one was home yet at Ruby's house.
Know, I mean, somebody could have been following her and watching her and waiting for the next time she was alone.
That's true.
That could have been the case. Who knows? That's just,
it's just those what ifs, like
it's the what ifs. You can't, what if yourself to death,
Yeah.
You can't should all over yourself.
I'm listening. Yes, but it's like, oh, if only, but just hate it. So she just said that Charlotte was saying that she hadn't seen Ruby since 9:05, and that was the time that she dropped her off. So and then Clarita, who was 20, so Clarita, was living with Ruby. We'll kind of get into that because she does give a statement later on, but her and Mary Claire had been kind of hanging out. They had gone to a meeting at Harding at the Bible building. They attended a meeting there at about 6:30, and then after that they were kind of hanging out with some friends. So they were just doing their college life stuff, living the dream. So right. So it kind of gets into a little bit of that, and we're going to get into their statement. So I'm not going to go deep into that right this second, okay? Because I am going to just focus on their, on their kind of statements that they provide later on. So we'll kind of glaze over for now, but bear with me, okay? So it does go into some facts. It does say E.R. Stapleton was of the victim. So he was gonna be. It says the husband of the victim was interviewed at 11 o'clock October 10th. So this would have been very, very shortly after she was, and it just mentioned that he had been teaching. So he had probably immediately flown in, from what I can gather. But he had been teaching at that point at Superior State College. He had actually started working there in September. Yes, in Wisconsin. So he was in Wisconsin, and he had just started. Like, this was a new thing, and we'll kind of get into all of that. So he had kind of been at several different places there. But it said when he questioned, now this, I kind of starred. So at this point, this is the 10th. So he mentions, and this is Ray Stapleton. He also went by ER. He went by Doc as well, because he was Dr. Stapleton. But it just said regarding the victim's disappearance, he replied that his only thought was she could have been abducted by a transient or possibly a Mexican. And, if, we would not maybe say that in those terms today. But this is his words. So he mentioned that they would travel between Illinois and Texas. So he did elaborate on this theory by stating that his wife was very dark complected. So that was where he thought, people would think that she was of Spanish descent. So that's what he had told the police at that time. He did also make the remark that his wife had led a golden life, and that she was dedicated very much to the church and the school, and she had constantly worked towards goals and met those goals. He did deny at the time that he was questioned that the separation, because they were separated. So at that time on the 10th, Ray was saying that it had nothing to do with marital troubles, but that it was just that he loved his wife very much and that he kept close contact with her and the family, and that basically there had been a disagreement with policy at Harding College. It was called Harding College at that time. And now it's called Harding University. But he just remarked at that time about that. And he was just trying his best to bear up under his. So he was very stricken with grief, and he knew that his daughter was grief. So this was what he was conveying on the 10th. So kind of remember that. It did go, so it just says he stated to investigators that he would have complete cooperation with them. And then he also, at that time, this was his first, like I said, interview. He did sob and cry. And after the tears,
according to the report,
this is all in the report with the police. He did make the remark that his wife was loved by everyone, and that his only complaint ever was that she had lost her sense of values and appeared more dedicated to the church and school than to her home. So,
which is what AY Magazine printed in 2018 when they did their 2-part series. They said they talked about all of this. Yes.
Yes. And this, and anywho, I'm sure that happens with some women, that was her priority. So, and that was kind of his, her priority was the church and the school, and that will come up kind of later on as well. So, he did say later on, within an hour of this initial contact, Ray would receive a telephone call, it said at the sheriff's office, relating that the man who had kidnapped the victim was now on the phone attempting to extort money. And it said investigators traveled to the scene, contacted telephone officials, and traced the call to a phone booth in Lubbock, Texas. So did you go into this?
Yes.
Okay. So that was about the Gray Chandler and then his friend, and that's the Carl Karash. Is that right?
And that was also very well documented in the magazine, newspaper, and internet articles.
And we'll kind of get into because they were interviewed, and we'll kind of get into their responses on that. But it does say that he kept them on the phone, and that the FBI, would interview these people later, and they were going to charge them with fraud by wire. So we kind of said that, and that will be important at a later date. Okay. So according to just an autopsy summary, when they did the autopsy, her body, it just says, was badly decomposed. It did state that there was a broken hyoid. Is that how you say that? The hyoid bone. That's that bone in the throat that kind of tells
if somebody's been strangled.
Yes. Okay, yes. I think that's hyoid. And then it does state also a broken thyroid cartilage. So broken thyroid cartilage there. And then it does mention that the cotton, was pushed down in the, so far into the throat. Does that make sense? And,
yes.
And we'll kind of post this. I'm going to take a picture that this is so, just to let, the listeners know how the file was presented to Heather. It's almost, some of the pages are almost completely illegible. So at this point, we had already been into the abduction and what happened that night. And all of that happened on the 8th. And then, so interviews kind of got started on October 14th. And there was also, and now what we did in the summary was mention that Ray was first interviewed on the 10th. Okay. But then Mary Claire would be interviewed on the 14th. So we're going to get into that. Bear with me. There's too much here. Okay, so to kind of summarize Mary Claire, so she again just mentioned that she went, her and Clarita were there living, with Ruby. And Mary Claire did say that she had spent some time away from Ruby. She had actually gone to school at Lipscomb College, and that she was actually back at Harding. So Mary Claire, did kind of have the typical relationship with her mother that was a little bit volatile. Clarita would say that Mary Claire had like a temper, that she was hot tempered. In her statement, in Clarita's statement, she just mentioned that Ruby, was a little bit messy. She did also mention that she was very caring. I think she was very like all about doing things a certain way. So maybe a little like OCD about things, but she did mention that she also maybe couldn't cook so well. I thought that was interesting. Yeah, it was kind of like messy, didn't really cook. She didn't really care about her, appearance. Like she didn't care about that. I will say in both of the girls' statements that they did comment to Ruby how nice her hair looked that day, that Tuesday that she went, that she disappeared. She had gone to get her hair done.
Oh.
So they were trying to, there was a lot of, Mary Claire had a lot of contention about the way that her mother kept things. And so I think she had kind of vocalized this. And so she said that they were kind of in a better place at this time because she was trying to kind of give her some, good affirmations and positive, like, hey, your hair looks really nice today. But Ruby did go get it done. And evidently she would do that every so often. Or Mary Claire did say that sometimes she offered to fix it. And what I thought was really interesting, and this is about hair, but when Mary Claire got home, she went to find Clarita. And this was, that same night, that Tuesday night when Ruby wasn't there, but Clarita was up there she said she was rolling her hair.
Nice.
So I know. So I guess that's what they did before they go to bed.
Did you never watch Grease?
Well, I did, but all I can remember is, I don't know, all the singing.
Yeah. No.
Summer days drifting away.
Yeah, I could I could see that as being a usual thing. People rolling their hair at night.
Yeah, I guess that's how.
I don't know. I see how people slept like that.
I know. I'm just thinking, wow, because I do remember being a little girl and using those foam rollers or sponge rollers, and
I always use foam rollers.
Oh my goodness, how awful!
Don't you remember that?
Was to sleep.
Yeah,
you were always rolling your hair.
I did.
Somehow.
I was a big hair roller.
I did use my mom would roll my hair with like the hot rollers typically, like I used those the next day. So yeah, that was kind of something I did. But just the thought of her sitting there rolling her hair, like they were chatting it up, doing girl talk, and like she was rolling her hair. I was like, oh, that's adorable. Anywho, I want to know more about this. So people phone us in or that, email us.
About 60s hair care?
Yes. I want to know like the procedure. So I'm just I just want to know for my own thing. It's very, like I have a picture of it in my mind and it's just very cute of them just hanging out, doing their hair. But
again, watch Grease.
Watch Grease. Frenchie was trying to be a hairdresser, right?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Am I remembering that right? Okay. So back to the girls' conversations about, Clarita kind of went into Ruby and the household. She said that the household was pretty, things were better. Clarita was pretty easygoing, it sounded like, and Mary Claire and her mother just kind of erupted a little bit. Mary Claire just wanted some room to be her own self and such,
Like
which
any
is why
teenage girl.
Yes, this is so normal. Like hearing about it is so normal to me. And according to other statements, some by her brother Glenn and others, like Mary Claire was kind of a daddy's girl. And so you can imagine that there was, even though Ray stated that there weren't, marital issues, there were. They were separated in the true fashion. Like they hadn't been living truly living together as husband and wife for like 9 years or so. I think that he would come into town and they would hang out, he would hang out with the family and visit with the family. But yeah, the kids knew. So Mary Claire, I think there was some contention and there was definitely some illusions. And in Mary Claire, she went as far as to say at that time, because this was the 14th and her mother's body would not be found until the 19th. And so she did say that she had prayed, that her mother was not passed, but if she was, that she prayed that her mother had gotten right with God and that she, her mother could kind of make living in the house kind of awful, like basically. There was just a lot of contention between Mary Claire. And I think some of that was, she was a daddy's girl. Daddy wasn't there. She didn't understand all the backstory. All she knew was that her father wasn't there and that her mother wasn't well kept. And
so, I mean, it just sounds like normal teen daughter, mom type stuff.
It does. It really does. And to me, it seems like going, kids of divorce. Like I will say Ruby was not wanting to get a divorce because of, you just didn't get a divorce. This was 1963 and she was fine living the way they were. And yeah, and that's just how it is. Does that make sense? But she wasn't going to get a divorce. And so she also wasn't obviously going into all of the marital things with her children as well. And so there was just some contention there. And she just mentions, now she did mention in Mary Claire's statements, and I thought that this was really cute. This kind of reminded me of you and your oldest.
Oh, yeah.
But she mentioned the day, I guess it was Tuesday. So normally, people didn't eat out because I'm thinking, well, why didn't she just pop a Pop-Tart? Or anyway, she came down, she was going to classes. Her mom was already up out early. Her mom, Ruby, had made breakfast for them that morning. Okay. So Ruby had gotten up, got ready, made breakfast, had it all laid out for these girls. And then she left. So, and then I guess Clarita did not have a morning class, but Mary Claire did. And she came down and she was like, breakfast was laid out. I had some breakfast. It was a little cold, but I had some breakfast. And then later they all met back for lunch. So all three of them had lunch together. So she put together a lunch and she said it was a very good lunch. And that was interesting to me because Clarita had commented on how the food was not good. The food. And I'm thinking if someone was cooking.
Well, that's probably how my kids would describe my cooking. The food was not good.
You think? But you're a good cook. I don't know.
Well,
but
I don't cook kids' food very well.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't cater to kids with my menus.
Yeah.
I guess I should, but I just...
Well, you have 3 of them.
I know. Maybe that's why they say I'm a bad cook.
That's right. Yeah. Or maybe why you have to run around town getting everybody different food.
Yeah. Well, I like casseroles. Nobody else likes casseroles. I like beans and cornbread. Nobody else likes that. I like vegetable soups. I like eating like I'm 85. So
you do, because that's the way it's always been. So
yes,
you cook like your granny. So I'm guessing Ruby kind of cooked maybe like her parents, but Mary Claire did say how good lunch was, and I think she had commented. So she was trying to again compliment Ruby where compliments should be. So I think that they had really worked on their connection, I guess. But she did say later on that she had come home and it was maybe like 5 or 5:30 and Ruby was there, and she did state that Ruby was, think it was a little bit odd because Ruby had not cooked dinner. And then she had told her, and Ruby was like, well, I'll just tell me what you want and I'll cook it. Well, Mary Claire went up to do her hair and came back down and was mad at Ruby. And this reminded me of you and your oldest. But she was mad at Ruby because normally when Mary Claire would say, hey, I don't know, Ruby would just fix her something. And so she'd have food just there. Well, this particular night, she said her mom was there was something going on. We'll kind of get into a little backstory later, but something was up and she was distracted. Ruby was distracted. And Mary Claire was mad because she did not have dinner. She was like, where's my dinner, lady?
Yeah.
So, and in my head, I'm thinking, well, this is 1963. I don't know. I mean, like, why don't you just pick up some Chick-fil-A at the cafeteria? But wait.
Because everything closed at 5, probably.
I know. And
there was no Chick-fil-A.
I know. But now there is at Harding, people. There's Panda Express too, by the way. So we have partaken. But coming from their statements, so basically the bottom line is they recalled everything that happened in their day. That I didn't see anything weird or, pertaining to that. They did just state, Mary Claire stated that Ruby was distracted, but there was nothing else. It was just a normal day, as far as that goes into. And then Glenn also, he went into similar, like his statement to the police. And his statement was also on the 14th of October. He just mentioned that he was very close to his mother, and that he wasn't that close to his dad. And I'm guessing, I think that that's pretty normal too, like a mama's boy. And I don't know. I have one daughter. So
yeah, I have 3 mama's boys.
Yeah, you have 3 mama's boys. And I see that in your boy, and I see that in other people's boys. And it's like, yeah. So I think that he was very close with his mom, and obviously he lived in Searcy, but it did say in his statement that he did try to go live with his dad, and he had actually tried to attend college because his dad was working and living in Texas at that time during this 9-year situation. And that I think he even when he got married, he was in Texas, like with his dad. So he did spend some time away from Ruby and more close to his dad. But I guess he had been back to Searcy and back to Ruby for a while. So he was he just mentions that he was much closer to Ruby. And he felt like Mary Claire was a lot closer to his dad, Ray. So he just felt like that. And he did mention that they would, Ruby and Mary Claire would argue, of course. And we know that was, and I see this as also like, maybe they were a lot alike.
Probably.
I think you tend to, and plus, I think and I think it's a girl thing too. But yeah, I think she obviously, Ruby did a lot for her daughter. I don't even think she realized how much she was doing until she came down and was like, "Where's my dinner?"
Right.
like, how dare you? So anywho,
I've heard that before. Where's my dinner, Mom? Where's dinner? Yeah, I heard it today, actually.
I'll tell you what Elle did to me today. So I am waiting for her in the hallway. I'm subbing at school. I'm looking for her, like actively looking for her in the hallway. And then I come back in the classroom and her Stanley was sitting beside my bag. So that stinker literally ran into the classroom, dropped her Stanley off, and did not say hi to me.
I can see that.
Not once. Not once. I had tears. No, I'm just kidding. And I texted her and I said, Elle, did you leave your Stanley cup and not say hi to me? And she's like, you didn't see me. I walked right past you. I'm like, oh, how rude. So yes. So I won't go, I'm not going to read you the whole of Mary Claire's, but that's just to summarize. Do you have any questions about Mary Claire's?
Nope, I don't.
That's kind of
sounds like
summary.
Just a normal mother-daughter rare fest, I mean, I had that too when I was growing up. I was quite a handful.
Very much so. And it really...
Well, you don't have to agree so quickly.
You and your granny? Oh,
yeah.
I just remember her saying, can I say it?
Yeah, I don't
She'd
care.
be like, she'd be like, Amber, you darn fool.
Yeah. Yep.
That was a big one.
Yeah.
And I would just always crack up. And you were always yelling at her. And you'd be like, do this and do that. And she'd be like, blah, blah. I mean, you guys would fight all the time. And then I truly knew that that's love. That was your love language.
We were just yellers,
like.
I guess. We were.
So I feel like Mary Claire and Ruby were a lot like you and Granny.
Yeah, probably.
That's how I feel about that. So, and likewise, we'll kind of fast forward to later on. So I am going to get into this. This says this, and I am going to summarize this. This is going to be a summary of Ray's statement. So, and Ray would, you did mention in the first, obviously Ray would pop up as being, and this is Ray Stapleton, Dr. Stapleton or whatever. He would pop up as a suspect in all the papers, the public records. And obviously we talked about that. There's literally t-shirts that say the husband did it. Right. I mean,
right.
That's the first place.
Not that say
we're not saying that he did it. No, we're not saying.
No. But
that's
the
what
first
they
place.
say.
That's the first place law enforcement will look.
Yes, they have to look, and there were other sources. Yeah, and I did read that.
It doesn't matter socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter education status. It doesn't matter any of that kind of stuff. It is always just procedural, almost, to go to the people that are closest to the ones that have been murdered or disappeared.
And they're looking for obvious motives and whatnot, because when we've talked about this before, typically the motives of murder are sex, money, and power. Yeah. So
and I wholheartedly
and there's
agree.
More.
I mean,
there's more.
Well, I think just almost everything, like murder-wise, can be dwindled down, tied to one of the three. Actually,
yes.
Murder can be tied to power, money, or sex.
And I feel like almost and I do listen to, and I know you do too, we watch a lot of crime stuff and docufilms and stuff, but it's so much about money.
It is.
Probably a lot of mental illnesses.
That too, but I didn't realize the extent of some of that until I watched the Murdaugh documentaries.
Yes.
And I was like, good grief.
Yes. And I do think the other thing that I would add to the money, power, whatever list would be just cover up, because I think a lot of times people are murdered and they didn't mean to, like an accident happened and then it's covered up. Does that make sense? Like, yes. I think things steamroll and then it's like, oh no, what just happened? And then it becomes,
but then they call their powerful friends and they try to get it covered up.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And I do think that happened. So, but I'm going to kind of dive into, so this is the statement, and this just says summary of first interview. So we're going to get into it. So
of who?
This is Ray Stapleton,
okay.
ER Stapleton. Okay. And it just says he's the husband of the victim. And he was interviewed in Searcy, and it was 11:00 a.m. on October 10th of 1963. And that he was related and engaged in teaching at the Superior State College in Superior, Wisconsin, where he had been employed since the first week of September. So fresh. This is 1963 as well. So this was a fresh situation. It says Stapleton continued in his statement by stating that he had last seen his wife during the last few days of August. And at that time of his departure from Searcy, he was headed to Wisconsin. So basically he had stopped in Searcy for a visit. And that he had communicated with her both by phone and letter on 2 or 3 occasions after he left in August. So they were in communications. He said when questioned about his opinion regarding the victim's disappearance, and we kind of went into this already, that he did feel like it was transient, impossible, Latinos kind of traveling in that area. And he did elaborate on Ruby's complaint. If you've ever seen the pictures of Ruby, which we have posted, she was really pretty. In fact, it remarked on attractive teacher. Okay. He also remarked about his wife's golden life, which we had talked about, and that he had, she lived for the church and school. And that was, and her church was the Church of Christ and then the Harding College. Stapleton states that he wanted, again, to ensure to the investigators that he was going to be very, involved, and that he would do whatever he needed to do as far as, in their investigation. So he was very on board with wanting, and we did mention that he did cry. He did cry and such. Okay. And that he said that he loved Ruby very much. So this would be the second statement. Okay. This was October 17th. So he did go into where he was born in Texas. And he just mentioned that his parents were farmers, and that he grew up and finished high school in Wolf, Texas in 1926. And after that, he did attend college at Tyler, Texas Commercial College. And the next 2 years, he was secretary to the superintendent of the L&A Railway Company in Louisiana. And during the fall of I believe this says 28. This is very, again, all of this paperwork is just very hard to read. It said he did come to Harding College in Morrilton. So that was when Harding was still located in Morrilton. And he did receive his bachelor's degree in 1932. They retained him in the college division as a professor, and he taught at Morrilton until they moved the school to Searcy. And then he continued to teach in Searcy, and he says until he got married to Ruby in June of 1935. And he said Mrs. Stapleton and him moved together. They moved to Alabama, where he was the secretary treasurer of a place called the Empire Nursery and Orchard Company. And in that time frame, that was like 1938 to 1939. And he was also superintendent of schools in Applin, Arkansas. So I guess they moved to this. I've never heard of Applin. Have you?
I haven't either. No, I've never heard of that.
Okay. And he said that, so he was the superintendent there, and Mrs. Stapleton was the principal teacher.
Oh,
and
okay.
And in 1940 to 41, during that school term, he said Mrs. Stapleton and him moved to Searcy and began teaching at Harding College. And then he taught there until 1953. And this would have happened in 1963. So he did say he resigned that year, and Mrs. Stapleton continued to teach until her disappearance, October 8th of 1963. And after resigning at Harding College due to differences between himself and Dr. Benson, who was the president of Harding, he mentioned that it was based on economic viewpoints and because of his desire and need to get away from Mrs. Stapleton. And this is his second interview. So again, his first interview, so this was different story now, maybe like his real story. So there was 2 years that he tried to farm. So after this happened, he was trying to farm and raise cattle at the Staggs place. I don't know where this is. And he was still trying to, he was staying in the home. So it says for a couple years, he was still in Searcy, living in the home with Mrs. Stapleton while she worked. And he was just doing some farming and cattle work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on, he mentioned from the very beginning of his marriage to Ruby that he was aware that she had, no regard, and this statement's from him, no regard for her personal hygiene or appearance. And this was mentioned by Mary Claire and others, so I guess that was a thing, but in all appearances and pictures, she looked really nice.
Yes.
I don't know. Obviously we weren't there. And he did mention that Ruby was as quote unquote sexless as any woman could be. And that he deplored, having anything to do with her in that regard. So, Yes. So this was from Ray. And then he did say she would wear clothing to church and out and about that should never have been worn even just in the home. Like it was just not tidy to him and not clean enough. And that she kept her house just the same as she kept herself. So it was just kind of, that was her thing. And that was mentioned by Mary Claire, and that was mentioned in Clarita's statements as well. So that she just didn't, that's just not what she was into. I mean, she just didn't keep, which made it really interesting to me as to why she was really concerned about the whisk.
Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, you could see why she was really interested in the whisk.
I can see why you were questioning the whisk choices.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that it kept coming up, and then it stood out because I'd already read these statements about her housekeeping. So I felt like that was a little different, although, this had been years in the making. So maybe she was newly concerned with it, or, because she had gotten her hair done. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe she was just turning a corner.
Or maybe she was just tired of everybody needing 24/7. And she just was like, screw it. I'm just, I'm going to wear yesterday's t-shirt. Wait, that's me.
I was about to say, this sounds like a personal.
It is. That's why none of that shocks me. So yeah, that's just a mom that's tired.
It's just every day.
Yeah.
Everyday thing.
Yeah.
Hey, I got 4 hours sleep last night because I was reading this file.
Yeah.
So, there. And I still look, fabulous.
Yes, no? Of course. Yes, Blair. Of course you do, Blair.
Shut up, Joe. Go ride your motorcycle. She grew up in, we talked about this in the Great Depression, and a lot of people that they did not throw stuff away because they're like,
my mom and I lived with two Depression era kids for most of my life. I mean, well, they weren't kids, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They'd been kids in the Depression.
Your grandparents.
My grandparents. My mom and I lived with my grandparents for the majority of my life, and they didn't throw anything away, and it pained me. It drove me crazy. So
because
I understand.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was not a big house cleaner either. So, we'd clean before you came over, but that's about it.
My mom was like OCD, but I will say my mom's later years, I would go to her house and be like, what's going on here? Like, I need to send my cleaners over. She just couldn't see. I think she literally couldn't see. So you kind of lose your hearing and your eyesight as you get older, and I think you stop caring. I think she's a little more laid back, but her house was always picked up. My mom's house was always picked up, but she did get lax in the cleaning department. Yeah. So that's a different story. So he did go on, about the house, that they could not have visitors over. It was so bad that they had to shut off like the living room.
Hey, I mean, I won't let you into my bathroom.
That's true. You did. So I was coming over. Was it yesterday?
It was
or the day before.
Day before.
Okay, and you were like, "Do not." Or go ahead and go to the bathroom.
No, I texted you and I said, "Yeah, come on over, but pee before you get here."
Yes, that's exactly what you said.
So again, tell me something in that report that I'm not living every day.
I'm sorry. You are as Ruby as Ruby.
I shut off all the rooms in my house, man, except for the ones that like y'all have to be in, which is the living room.
The living room. So you do exactly what Ray's talking about here.
Yes.
Yes. He just mentioned just the condition that they were, describing was just, for him, it was deplorable, he says. And then he did talk about...
That's one man's opinion.
It's one man's opinion. And especially if he was a very neat character, if he was very opposite, that would have been
like
hard.
if my husband was like a neat freak or whatever, it wouldn't work around here.
That would be a problem. Yeah, that would be.
We don't call it the Bramlett frat house for nothing.
We don't. I can attest to that. I went into the frat house, Tuesday night, and it was fratty. It was loud and
basketball
boys everywhere.
On the floor, boys everywhere. Yeah.
No one wearing pants or shirts. Like Max was in a diaper.
Max never wears a shirt.
That's okay. I mean, he's adorable. But Bo screaming. He was screaming from the bedroom for you because he wanted food.
I told you
That was
I
fun.
live that life. So none of
Screaming
it's shocking.
food boys. Yes.
Yeah.
And I was like, and
And
you were
it's quiet at
you were
your house.
I was like, it's way too quiet in my house. And you were like, quit. What'd you say? Like,
Quit rubbing it in.
quit rubbing it in. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
sometimes it's too quiet, except when Elle has over her whole entourage of ladies.
Yeah.
And I love her friends. But anyway, okay, so he does go into the sex life, which is important to, men anyway. Not to,
But we don't have to
I just said
discuss
to
that.
men.
Yeah.
I just said about men, everybody. But he did say, with his, Miss Stapleton that wasn't in a good way. There was no desire there. And then he does say that
I don't know why. He sounds like a peach.
You just said that really sarcastically.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Sorry. That basically that kind of for him, he kind of this is according to him, he actually, kind of made no desire for female sex. So it's just kind of period. And then they did talk about her cooking and her cleaning and her caring for the children. And he did go into, in his statement, so this is all in his statement, he did say, that he had homosexual tendencies from infancy due to this lack of love and affection at this time, coupled with his, sexless life. And so that's what he discussed with the, in his statement. And it does go into, and I will say this, it does go into some names. We're not going to do that. And I will say there are pages. This statement of his is several pages long. It's about 12 pages long, and it does go into many names. And we're not going to get into that. So after, in 1953, he did leave the school. So it does say, and after leaving Harding in 53, he would pick up hitchhikers. And so he did mention that was going on. He would pick up hitchhikers. And this went on for several pages. And he kind of got into that because I will say the police officers had already been talking to people, interviewing people. They interviewed people at where he worked, at the places that he worked, and he had kind of moved around quite a bit after he left Harding. He went into, and Amber, you'll interject here, like he lived in Texas. He taught at a school in North Carolina, Virginia. Like there were several places that he was working in different colleges. So the police were trying to kind of put together this whole trail and trying to find out all about him and his relationships. And so the police were wanting him to outline all of his relationships. So he does get to the point where he does outline the relationships with the Gray Chandler and then the Carl Koresh, correct?
Yeah, I misspoke and called Gray Gary in the last podcast.
Okay.
But Gray,
I see Gary when I see it too, so I have to kind of be like, Gray.
Well, I thought it was I thought it was a misprint in the paper because that is well documented that those were the two that made the calls in Lubbock.
Yes, they were. And so he goes into, in his statement, there were several other men mentioned, but they were mentioned for a reason because of, that. So anywho, but he did get into the Koresh and Chandler. So basically he met them. They were transients. They were homeless men. They kind of lived on the road. He met them on the road. I think he picked them up, and I think he had picked up one, and then the other one introduced him. So he does talk about how he did have, homosexual acts with both of them. And over several years, he would end up giving these men about $4,000 is what it totaled up to over the span of several years. And that's just the money that he would wire them and whatever. But he also set them up in hotels. Like when they would come through, they would call him. He would set them up at the Capitol Hotel. And they do mention back in this time in the 60s that the Capitol Hotel was a dump. So
That's weird.
I thought that was interesting because it is beautiful now, and it is like an extremely nice hotel to stay in. But at that time, so they stayed at that time. The Capitol Hotel was across from I think this train station. So the train station was there, and the Capitol Hotel was just not in good repair. So I don't know if it was just because it was very old at that time and just not kept up or whatever. They do mention, and me and Amber found this extremely fascinating because they were going all over the country. Like it's like they were on a perpetual merry-go-round in this country. Like they were everywhere. They were in every state, but they did mention that they hung out and stayed at the Cecil? Is it called the Cecil?
I thought it was the Cecil Hotel.
I don't know.
We'll have to look
that one up.
Yeah, there's a Netflix documentary about that hotel.
Did you
really
watch
popular?
That?
Yeah, I did. And I think it
was that
Cecil.
Shocking to you?
Oh, you mean about the
disappearance
of the girl? Oh gosh, yes.
Oh,
that was awful.
That was so shocking. If you guys have not watched, what is it? I don't know. We'll post it, but that was so shocking to me. But they did stay at the Cecil Hotel, and the Cecil Hotel was known for Cecil, Cecil, but it was known for like kind of homeless people. I think they took in transients or kind of like pay by it was always a cheap place to stay, basically. Then now everywhere, whatever. I think they're trying to rebrand probably since that Netflix.
Well, the night
incident,
stalker Richard Ramirez actually stayed at that hotel.
Oh yeah, tons of. I think didn't also like what's his name? Not Ted Bundy, but several others stay there.
There was a lot going on at that hotel. I think
they said Richard Ramirez came in literally with blood all over him and just walked into his hotel room like nothing. I do remember that it was that kind of place. It was on Skid Row, but they stayed at places like that. They were just, they really were constantly.
Well, it says in 1962 there was a man walking by the Cecil Hotel with his hands in his pocket when he was struck to death by a falling woman who fell out a window at the Cecil.
Now that is terrible.
Mm-hmm. So there was a lot. I mean, there's a whole documentary about this hotel.
Yes. Well, there's a lot. It is very interesting.
And it does call it a serial killer's paradise. Richard Ramirez was there. Yeah. So lots of different. Jack Unterweger, who, he was, I guess, a serial killer as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Lots of serial killers.
It doesn't sound like that was a good place at the time.
Yeah. I think at any time. So I think that that's true to be. But yes, so a lot of Ray's statement here does get into just his relationships, and particularly those two men. And like I said, it did mention some others and even some, we're going to just tell you, there will be a book written about this. I'm not going to say anything about that because it's in the works, and it'll probably outline
it's not written by us.
Not written by us, but I've read these people's work before. It's going to be very in depth, I will say. So they're probably going to go into every single nitty gritty detail, but me and Amber decided that was, that's a lot. It's a lot going on. So we're definitely not going to give any names out for people in Searcy. So Ray's statements just pretty much went to that. So a lot of the police file was kind of centered around that, honestly. And I will get into a few other things, but they did polygraph Mary Claire and Glenn. So her feelings.
But let me add that polygraph tests are not admissible in court, and just to think about the polygraphs
not at this time at all.
In the 1960s, I don't know how reliable those would be. So I don't put a lot into that.
No. Oh no, I don't either. And this was based on her, they're just looking at blood pressure responses or whatever.
But if I was in that situation, my blood pressure would be skyrocketing.
Feel like mine would be extremely high, just in general. Just asking my name, I would be like, I don't know. But anyway, so I don't personally put any, thing on this or whatever, but yes. So they felt like she did not know, but she felt like it was family. She felt like someone in the family was responsible for having, she just felt at that time that was reality. So she didn't really know. And we still don't know, obviously. So that's what we're trying to pinpoint and trying to get information on. So this was all done. All of these polygraphs were done in October, and then his polygraph was done in December. Okay. And the polygraphs were done in December. The interviews took place in October. And so we're going to kind of jump. So the file that Mary Claire's daughter got, Heather. So it kind of, basically that's all the information that it had in there were just a lot of the statements at that time. And it does have, I will go into other things. So it does produce several names in the file of people. So the police were really working all the areas around the country. They were trying to find similar situations in which similar things happen to women. That's what they were looking for.
And
so
which they should have. I mean, that would have been the first thing most departments did.
Yes. So from my point of view, they were really trying hard as far as they were talking to everybody. They were talking to everyone related with Ray, connected with Ray. And they did come back and Karash and Chandler, they did track down where these two men were October 8th, and they were actually staying at a Salvation Army in Louisiana. So they got evidence from everyone, and they tracked down all the other names in the file that we found. Like, they tracked them all down and confirmed that they could not have done it. So they were kind of following these leads until they kind of couldn't any longer. And they did in the file, they did have long distance phone records. So they pulled all the phone records. They pulled all the financial and bank statements between Ray and also between, Ruby, because they have a lot of stuff. They had a lot of stuff together. She did have her own bank account. He had his own bank account.
And this that you're relaying right now can be read in the article from AY Magazine. So this isn't some breaking news we're breaking on here. This is readily found on the internet on that article series in AY.
Yes. So that's all known. But in, all of the other stuff that we've discussed, but the file goes into all of the details of the long distance records, and it does show all the bank records. And they did look at Ray. They looked at Ray closely. They looked at everyone surrounding him closely. And at that time, they felt like there was nothing there. They looked at everyone. Now, I think that is a very interesting thing. So, and I want you to help me with this. A lot of the, sorry, I am blah, blah, blah tonight, but, the Orrin, what's his name? The Orrin Ray, the other suspect that we had mentioned in the first.
Ray Hayes, and he was mentioned in the AY magazine. He had been a name that was always talked about, and his ended up being more gossip than anything else. He had been picked up by the police. He had been questioned, and afterwards he had been released. He also just a couple of really interesting things about him. His wife died of strychnine poisoning within, I think, a few months of the Stapleton case, and he was not arrested for that either. And then I think in the early 70s, or at some point in the 70s, he was part of a burglary case, and that was dismissed as well.
Okay. And I was particularly trying to find his name in the file, in the state police file, because Heather did mention that he was originally in the 1993 case file that was given to them. At that time they went through, his name was mentioned several times in that file.
But
Now
I
there
didn't
was,
see it and you didn't see it. So
I did not, but there is a Ray that I did go back through it, and Ray is mentioned. There's another name out beside it. So he is mentioned in this
oh, he
file
is?
as Ray,
Okay.
not as, or I guess he went by Ray, but it says
Probably.
Ray Hayes in the file. It doesn't have any notes with it. So it's just like, it's just a jotted down note from the officer. Does that make sense? And then it does say a blue, white 1956 Chevy. I don't know. It says something. Oh, Thunderbird. It says also Thunderbird. So it's outlining some vehicles that these men had. And I do recall there was, maybe some discussion that they were driving around that night or whatever. So we'll kind of get into that. So this information was sent to Heather. So this is directly from Heather, but it was sent, and I'll tell you at the end who it was sent by. So it does say Mama was working at Harding Laundry that year, and I guess this was 1963, doing alterations. But one day in late October, a man brought in some clothing to be cleaned from heavy bloodstains. The man was a known bootlegger who lived south of town. Greg Rhodes, the manager of the laundry, called the police, and he was told to go ahead and clean the clothing. That the man was a hunter and had probably killed an animal. Mama came home that day in tears. She cried and cried. Emotions were raw that fall, but she felt the police should have picked up the clothing. Everyone who worked in the laundry was aware of the clothing. Lot Tucker and Dr. Benson were called, and I think they are the ones who told Uncle Greg to call the police. Later, I think this man was questioned about your grandmother. So this lady's telling, Heather, his wife died about 2 to 3 months later, and I think he spent time in prison for her death. We have always felt like the investigation was botched, whether it was inefficiency or carelessness or whatever. So this is what she's saying. And then she just says that she'll be praying for Heather. So she asked if she remembered. So this lady that conveyed this, Heather asked if she remembered the name. And the lady said Ray, I think. I think he was questioned eventually, maybe after his wife's death. Something else that my granddad and I saw might be interesting, maybe helpful to you. My grandparents lived over on West Arch, about 3 blocks west of Westside Church, and I had been at their house one afternoon, somewhere around 4:30 or 5, and I don't remember the time. Just know it was late afternoon, and Granddad drove me back home. There was a 4-way stop at the corner of Arch and Gum where the post office was. The building still stands. As Granddad stopped, Miss Ruby also came to a stop going north. Granddad tooted and waved, and she never looked our direction. I will never forget the look on her face. It was a mixture of anger and determination. And Granddad says she's angry about something. Something has happened. He took me on home. She disappeared that very night. So that was the same day that Ruby disappeared. Hindsight is 2020. Granddad said later he wished so much he had either followed her car to see where she was going or given her a call later to see if she was okay. White County had gone dry after 3 elections in 58, 60, and 62. Remember, we kind of talked about this, that, we are in a dry county, which means that we don't have quote unquote liquor stores, but it wasn't always that way. So we were talking about that. So it had actually gone dry in 58, according to this. But I know it was even dry back in, remember, because we went into the Galloway Gertie, our very first episode. So
right.
the Galloway College wasn't going to come to Searcy if we were wet. So we said, so this is all alleged information, but this was information told to Heather. So that we are conveying that information. Okay. So, and then also additional information in the file. So we do have, they did provide a letter, I guess, to the Arkansas State Police, or had it turned over to the Arkansas State Police. So the letter was several pages long, and it was written, her name was Billy. She has since passed. I did look her up. And so she wrote the letter to JR. And my thinking was, and probably JR was the name of the police chief in Searcy in the 90s. This letter was written in the 90s. And evidently, this letter was written by a counselor. So she was counseling people. So she doesn't outline their names. She just mentions initials in her letter. So there's no names. I've reached out to her family. They don't know anything about it. In fact, they did not realize that she wrote a letter to the police until many years, like until recently. So again, there's a letter in the file that was written by, her name was Billy. She has passed. And she just mentioned some people that, by initials, that were counseling with her, that the woman, the wife, was thinking her husband did have something to do with killing Ruby. So this was a concern, enough concern to her that she wanted the police to know and check into it. I have no clue if they did anything with this letter. The letter's in the file, but it doesn't have any type of notes. It doesn't have any type of further information that someone was interviewed. That's a little bit frustrating to me, that nothing else was done with this information. So I don't know why nothing else was done with this information. I think it was pertinent, but it does show that the wife was thinking that he did it because based on things that he said, and he was kind of getting older and sick, and he would say things about killing a teacher, killing a, and things about the body and such. So he had mentioned these things in the letter, and she mentions them. And then also, so at first the woman was thinking that her husband had no clue where Bull Creek was. And then she had so she had kind of put it out of her mind that he could have been involved, but he did work like on Main Street in 1963. I will say that. And he also, evidently, she found out later that he did know exactly where Bull Creek was. He was familiar with that area. He was into hunting and fishing. And she was told by friends and relatives that he knew where Bull Creek was. So she felt like her husband was responsible, and she conveyed this to her counselor, and the counselor wrote a lengthy letter to the police. And so obviously the Arkansas State Police had this letter in their file, so they received it, but there is no indication that anything was done with this letter.
Interesting.
And yes. So, and this was in the 90s, and it does, all it says is their initials, and it talks about how she did, she tracked down some of this stuff. She had these things in her head, but she tracked down where he worked. She confirmed where he worked in 1963 through photographs and such and other people. And then she did confirm that he knew where Ruby's body was found. So that was super interesting to me. I think that that's a huge possible lead. I don't understand if this file is open, they need to check into it, definitely. But it does say in the file as well that, and a lot of information, I don't know, you can tell that they were starting, like the criminal investigation division. So the cold case division actually got a hold of the file in 2014. So going backwards a little bit, the belt and the button and the brassiere. So way back in 63, all of this information was sent to the FBI. So obviously at that time, the state of Arkansas did not have that type of lab situation to process evidence, physical evidence like that. And so there is a letter in the file that indicates that, they were sending the information to be looked at. They wanted everything to be, looked at by the FBI. The FBI came back. It does state, and it was very hard to read every single word of the document, but the FBI did come back and say that there was, and I didn't include, they sent the cotton that was in Ruby's throat as well. So those were the items that were sent to the FBI. So everything that they could have. So the cotton. So the FBI did respond in a letter and said that they could not find anything significant about any of that physical evidence found, and that they did not have anywhere to store this this physical evidence. And so they were going to send it back to the Arkansas State Police. So in 2014, this officer, it's a David Moss, he is trying to track down all of this evidence. So he sends letters out to the FBI. He sends letters out to the Arkansas State Police, where the file, evidence was supposed to be kept, like their locker or whatever. He sent letter out to the White County Sheriff's Department, and he sent a letter out to the Searcy Police Department. They all came back and said that there was no physical evidence found, or none of those things were found. There was nothing. And the FBI had come back and said that anything that they had been destroyed. They did not say how it was destroyed or if it was destroyed on purpose or whatever, but it had been destroyed in 1993. So it's so frustrating.
It is. It's very frustrating.
Yes. I'm just like, so bottom line is there is a lot of information in this file. There's just so much. And there's so much that Heather is looking into. She does have the Facebook page, the Ruby Stapleton Facebook page that you can please go check that out. She is always we're still looking for evidence, and we don't know how that can come about. I think if you have any leads, or if you have any family knowledge, or anybody that you think that would know about this case, definitely have them connect with Heather and get in that group and give her any information that you have. Like I said, there is a book in the works that's going to completely lay out every single detail in this case file. And we have skimmed it for
the case file, not the book.
Do what?
We've skimmed the case file.
Obviously, I would love to skim the book. I have a feeling the book's going to be very well written because their other books have been well written. But yeah, this case file has, it's so much. There's so much information here that it's impossible for us to, there's just not enough time unless we devoted like a whole season to this. So there's just not enough time. But we feel like we've outlined the high points in it. Everybody was looked at. The police clearly did a lot of deep diving in 1963, and then I feel like for whatever reason they just stopped. I don't know. There's not a lot of information, and part of it I'm sure is the age of the file. I do feel like when Heather filed her request originally in 2013 and it was denied, I think personally looking at this, and based on what she had said was in the file in 1993, I feel like, that's a lot of time for things to get condensed, to get misplaced, I don't know. There's just a lot. I think they probably tried to go digital with some of this paperwork, I guess.
Yes. I worked at a police department for several years, and I worked in public information, and I put together FOIA requests. And everything you're talking about is very true. They do get backlogged. There is a lot of stuff that they have to keep up with, and sometimes there's just not a lot of room.
And I can't imagine. 50 years, 60 years of information, and it's so sad to me because I'm sure it comes down to funding and just having the space. Because like I said,
exactly what it comes down to is
funding
and space.
Well, and even the FBI came back and said that they didn't have information. This is the FBI. So, they didn't have a place to store this evidence. So they were sending it back to the Arkansas State Police. And then even as of 1993, they had destroyed records. And we didn't even dive into, there was another, I will say there was another person that the police were crossing a lead on. His last name was Burns, and that he had been involved in a similar case, like I believe in Illinois.
Yes, but they and
they kind of put that out.
They did put that out there, but into 2014. But he was not in the state at the time. They thought that possibly he could be here because we had the missile silo, and so they looked at his tracks during that time, and they figured out that there's probably no way he was here during that time.
Yes, and that would have been 2014. So that would correlate with the time frame that she had filed her request. So I don't know if that had anything to do with their reasoning.
If that, yeah, I mean, because that is new information, true or not. If it ended up being true or not, it's still new information.
And that they were at least looking into that, which does make sense, because evidently he had murdered someone and taken her from a lawn, like a
his name was Roger Burns. He was a former U.S. Air Force radar technician, and he was convicted of a similar murder in Illinois in 1965.
So similar time frame, similar situation, and he did he spent time in jail because they got him for it.
He did.
So yes, that was there was a lot. You can tell there are a lot of leads that the police followed. They were going around to all the different states, and none of the leads produced enough information to definitely arrest anybody or say anybody was involved in this. So, which saddens me, but I do think that this letter written by Billy is something. Evidently, there are thoughts about Ray still, about his involvement. So anyway, we are still looking into this with Heather. There could be down the road, if there's any developments, obviously we will revisit this. But if you have any information at all about the Stapleton murder, please connect with Heather, and please go to her page, and we will be sharing all of this information. But you can email us and connect with us. So yeah. So is there anything, Amber, can you think of anything else
you pretty much said it all. So yeah, ditto. But we do want to reiterate that everything we've said today is public record, and
in this case file provided,
or in this case file, or has been reported before online or in a newspaper. And we've looked at newspapers all the way back to 1963. So there was a lot of research and a lot of hours put into this case. We do want to thank Heather, who is Ruby's maternal granddaughter. And I guess any granddaughter's maternal, right? I don't know. Whatever that means. But that is Ruby's granddaughter, and she's been very helpful. And I hope that she finds answers, and I hope that she finds closure. And we at Unexplained Arkansas will be more than willing to help her in this journey. So, but we thank you guys for listening very much, and we will be back next week with another Unexplained Arkansas. In the meantime, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram. You can send us an email at unexplainedArkansas@gmail.com.
Yes.
I think about
and we did have 2 more countries, by the way. So now we're in 19 countries, unless there's more since we last talked.
So Mexico and Greece are our new countries.
Yeah.
So we're really excited about that. Yep. All righty. Well, that is it, and we will see you guys next week.
Thank you. Bye.